I was, before becoming a filmmaker, for several years Jean-Pierre Melville's assistant, and as I had been assistant to Louis Malle and others. But Melville, the character, was special, and certainly his films are very, very special. I mean, long before the Nouvelle Vague was invented by Truffaut, Godard, and Chabrol, Melville had been there. He started, I think, soon after the war in 1947 or 48 to do a first movie just with a crew of one person, Henri Decaux, who stayed his director of photography forever. And just the two of them and the camera made a movie at a time when the union's minimum for a team was somewhere in 30 and more persons. So he was at war with the unions, but he was also, because of that, but he was also at war with the aesthetics of filmmaking as la qualité française that was reigning at the time, because he went out, I mean, you may call it today dogma, without light, without anything. He lived in his own studio. He had built a studio into an old garage, and so there was the studio space downstairs, and somewhere in the attic he had built an apartment for himself where he was living. And this apartment didn't look like a French apartment. It was like the movie set for an American movie, the typical American sort of interior decoration. And so he just moved, mostly living by night, sometimes only working at nights, even the shooting of his films. Even though it was in the studio, he didn't need night, but he just only woke up, you know, around midday or so, and then moved from his studio down, from his apartment, from his bedroom, with a staircase down into the studio. Now, this staircase, being there physically in the studio, had to be built into the sets of all his movies. You can always recognize the staircase of Jean-Pierre Melville's apartment studio film sets. It was all one to him. When he was writing the screenplay, he came down from his library bedroom down into the studio. He put up a few studio walls, a window, a backdrop mostly of New York or so. And then he started to write the script just to see how he could shoot it in his studio. So if there ever was a film auteur, one-man filmmaker, it was Jean-Pierre Melville. But he wasn't an amateur. He knew American films by heart, every line, every shot, every setup. He was the total autodidact. Only Fassbinder, I've known later, knew that much also in his head about films. And in his opinion, there were only a very few truly professional filmmakers. Number one was William Wyler. Number two was Robert Wise. It was the classic American filmmaking, like the best years of our lives. That would have been his role model. And he tried to duplicate these films in his French detective or film noir films, and always trying to make look Paris as if it was Manhattan. Now, I was just preparing film school when, through the help of Bertrand Tavernier, who was then a journalist and had been to interview Melville, I was introduced to Melville. And what Jean-Pierre, what he needed, wasn't a professional assistant, because that I was not. He needed an apprentice. He was a great teacher and he wanted to share his knowledge, but also he needed someone who would open the gate of his garage, who would, you know, then sit down in his office, start to make a breakdown of a script, a shooting schedule, or actually prepare a script. Now, when he started to adapt a novel, which most of the time these were kind of detective, film noir, pulp fiction novels, first thing he sent me out to buy a few more copies of the book. because then he started to cut the book into pieces. So he needed the verso of the sides, which he had just cut out. And he glued the pieces like editing, like you would do on a computer today, but this was before that. So he cut out the pieces, and then I had to put them on a page. And this way he built his script without actually writing a single line. The important thing is in casting is how you welcome an actor, how you go to shake hands, how to make him comfortable or to make him uncomfortable. For casting sessions, sometimes if he wanted to intimidate an actor, he set himself at the far end of the studio against the light, you know, with some spots towards the entrance, and the poor actor had to walk all the way diagonal through the studio until he was facing him behind his desk. And well, most actors didn't even make, you know, these whatever 100 feet they had to walk before meeting him. And so the casting was not so much to read the lines. And but for each actor it was different. Somebody like Jean-Marie Volonté or Alain Delon, he wanted to intimidate, so he used this technique. Someone like Emmanuel Riva, who had just done the Hiroshima Mon Amour, of course, he posed as an intellectual filmmaker. Then with Belmondo, he pretended to know everything about boxing, and so he was the constant chameleon. Now, for the actors, it's a type of performing which is not easy to do. I mean, usually you go for psychology, you try to understand the motivations of your character, you try to take from reality into, you know, get your character into the real world. And here they only had to live by themselves. Nothing was given to them. And Jean-Pierre would only give gestures. He would spend minutes on setting the head right, and where exactly next to the camera the actor had to look, he would put a little scotch tape and check this. No, a little further to the right, a little further to the right. Good, that's it. No gesture, no smile, no. I mean, just kind of making them become like icons rather than human beings. And somebody as alive as Jean-Paul Belmondo couldn't stand it. You know, he came from à bout de souffle, he came from improvising with Godard, and all of a sudden he was put in this corsage. But I think it was very becoming to him. Others, like Reggiani in the Doulos, he immediately understood, and he did it very, very well. And Delon was in that sense the perfect actor for Melville, because he loves to be just this icon and not betray any feelings and not to bring his individuality into the part, but the part to become an archetype rather than anything else. He was, in a sense, a con man, and he considered himself filmmaking somehow, getting people to come and see them. And if he drove up the Champs-Élysées and he saw that they were queuing in front of his films, it was like, I've got them. It was like the con man who fooled people to coming to see his movies, and the movie is a tool somehow to entice the audience. So it really is like, it goes way back almost to like Luna Park, when film was just another attraction between the La Femme à Barbe and whatever attractions there are, and he was constantly aware of this way, and then he had to smuggle then in his message, but the message, which is obviously friendship, loyalty, treason, and things like that, he would never articulate. He would only talk about the actual craftsmanship of doing. And so with this full-time service also in between the films, I spent 2.5 years with him, was where, of course, I learned everything about the trade. And that's, I always call him mon premier maître, my first master. The Doulos, the picture you are going to see now by Jean-Pierre Melville, is somehow the quintessential of all the films that were to come afterwards, the Samouraï, the Cercle Rouge, and so. In as much he creates a completely artificial universe, the universe of the film noir. It is shot in Paris, but every location he spotted had to look as if it was Manhattan somehow. It had to be as little French as possible. Belmondo is wearing a kind of a raincoat, Burberry, he's wearing a hat. Everybody in the movie is wearing hats at a time when in Paris nobody was wearing hats. It's a complete universe of its own. And even the facade of the house in the beginning, where the old man is killed by Reggiani, is built in the studio, but in a small studio, this facade, just to make it look like maybe Alexander Trauner in the Quai des Brumes and these early films, Hôtel du Nord. But in this Kafkaesque universe, with no reality interfering, except the reality of the characters, he goes straight like in a Greek tragedy about friendship betrayed, about revenge, and always about death. In the Doulos, the director of photography was Nicolas Ayer, who actually could only work in black and white, and was stylistically Jean-Pierre Melville's favorite cinematographer, because he knew to create these blacks that are really black and white that are really white. So the film noir without nuances, very, very graphic. Also, Melville was a great, perfectionist in the technique. He always wanted to have the famous Dupont negative, black and white negative, film emulsion, only fabricated, I think, in Italy, and very expensive. He couldn't afford, so then we used Kodak Plus X and Double X, and he could spend hours comparing emulsions against each other and checking the light, and all this to create an as artificial as possible universe.